Welcome to the story of Our Lady of Lourdes. For the next hour, we will journey together to a small town in the foothills of the Pyrenees, where heaven touched earth. In 1858, in the town of Lourdes, France, a young girl named Bernadette encountered the Virgin Mary 18 times. These apparitions would transform a forgotten grotto into one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the world. Let this story bring you peace as we explore the miraculous events that unfolded in Lourdes. Lourdes is a small town in southwestern France, nestled in the foothills of the Pyrenees Mountains. The town sits at the convergence of three valleys. The Gave de Pau River flows through Lourdes. This river would play an important role in the story to come. Its waters, cold and swift, carved through the landscape. In the mid-1800s, Lourdes was a quiet town, known primarily for its medieval fortress perched on a rocky outcrop. The castle overlooked the entire valley below. The population of Lourdes in 1858 was approximately 4,000 people. Most residents were farmers or worked in the local mills. Life was simple and often difficult. The winters in Lourdes were cold and damp. The Pyrenees Mountains brought harsh weather. Snow often covered the higher elevations, while rain soaked the valley below. On the edge of town, along the Gave de Pau River, there was a rock formation known as Massabielle. This name meant old rock in the local dialect. Massabielle was an unremarkable place, a grotto or cave-like opening in the rock face. Most townspeople avoided the area. It was damp, overgrown with vegetation, and sometimes used as a shelter for pigs. The grotto was formed by the river's erosion over countless years. The limestone rock had been carved, creating a natural alcove, roughly 15 feet high and 30 feet wide. Above the grotto opening, wild rose bushes grew. They clung to the rocks, their branches tangling together. In winter, these bushes were bare. In spring, they would bloom. Inside the grotto, the ground was muddy, littered with debris. The ceiling was blackened from fires that shepherds had built for warmth. It was not a place of beauty or reverence. The people of Lourdes gave little thought to Massabielle. It was simply part of the landscape, a rocky outcrop by the river, nothing more. That heaven sees differently than we do. What appears ordinary to human eyes can become sacred in an instant when God chooses to reveal his presence. On January 7th, 1844, a baby girl was born in Lourdes. Her parents, François Soubirous and Louise Castéreau, named her Marie Bernadette Soubirous. The family would call her Bernadette. She was the first of 9 children, though 4 of her siblings would die young. Infant mortality was tragically common in that era. François Soubirous was a miller. He worked hard, but success eluded him. He was honest, but not shrewd in business. The family struggled financially. In Bernadette's early years, the family lived at the Boly mill. François managed the mill, and they had adequate housing. These were relatively stable times, but misfortune seemed to follow the Soubirous family. François was accused, falsely, of stealing flour. Though never convicted, the accusation damaged his reputation. Work became harder to find. The family moved several times. Each new home was smaller, darker, poorer than the last. By 1858, the Soubirous family had fallen to the very bottom of society. They lived in a single room that had once been a prison cell. The locals called it le cachot, the dungeon. This single room, 16 feet by 13 feet, housed 7 people: François, Louise, Bernadette, and her 4 surviving siblings. One tiny window provided the only light. The walls were damp. The air was stale. There was barely room for everyone to sleep. Privacy was impossible. The family survived on charity and whatever odd jobs François could find. They often went hungry. Bernadette's growth was stunted by malnutrition. From early childhood, Bernadette suffered from asthma. Her breathing was labored, especially in cold or damp conditions. The cachot, with its poor ventilation, made her condition worse. When Bernadette was young, a cholera epidemic swept through Lourdes. She contracted the disease. Most who caught cholera died, but Bernadette survived. The illness left her even more frail. Her lungs were permanently weakened. She was small for her age, thin, pale, often sick. Bernadette could not attend school regularly. Her family's poverty meant she was needed to work to help the family survive. She worked as a shepherdess, tending sheep in the fields around Lourdes. Long hours, in all weather, for minimal pay. This was her life. Bernadette never learned to read or write. She spoke primarily in Bigourdon, the local dialect. Her French was halting and limited. When she was 13, Bernadette was sent away to the village of Bartret, about 4 miles from Lourdes. She worked as a servant for a family named Lagueuse. Her duties included caring for their children, tending their sheep, cleaning their home. She lived with them, separated from her own family, earning her keep through labor. In Bartret, Bernadette expressed a deep longing. She wanted to make her first Holy Communion, to receive Jesus in the Eucharist for the first time. But she had not yet learned the catechism. She knew her prayers, she knew how to say the rosary, but she could not recite the formal responses required for communion. The Lagueuse family promised to help her learn, but the demands of work left little time for study. Bernadette grew frustrated. The other children her age had already received communion. She felt left behind. In January 1858, Bernadette made a decision. She would return to Lourdes. She would live again with her family in the cachot, and she would attend catechism classes to prepare for First Communion. So Bernadette came home, to poverty, to the dungeon, to her loving but struggling family. She had no idea that within 1 month her entire life would be transformed, that she would become the most famous person in all of France, that her name would be known around the world, that millions would come to the place where she would soon encounter the Queen of Heaven. But that moment had not yet arrived. First, there would be an ordinary day. February 11th, 1858, a day that began like any other. Thursday, February 11th, 1858, was a cold day in Lourdes. Bernadette, her sister Toinette, and a friend named Jeanne Abadie set out together to gather firewood and bones. Gathering bones was a task for poor families. The bones could be sold to be ground into fertilizer. Every small source of income mattered when you lived in extreme poverty. The 3 girls made their way toward Massabielle, where driftwood often collected along the riverbank. The area was secluded about a mile from the center of town. To reach the grotto, they needed to cross a small canal called the Mill Stream. The water was cold, and the girls removed their shoes and stockings to wade across. Bernadette's sister and friend crossed quickly, but Bernadette hesitated. Her asthma made her sensitive to cold water. She worried about becoming ill. The other girls called to Bernadette, urging her to hurry. But Bernadette asked them to throw stones into the water to create stepping stones. They refused and went ahead to gather wood. Bernadette was left alone. She sat down to remove her stockings, preparing to cross the cold water. The morning was quiet, except for the sound of the flowing river. Suddenly, Bernadette heard a sound like a gust of wind. She looked up, but the trees and bushes were completely still. There was no wind at all. Bernadette heard the sound again. This time she looked toward the grotto of Massabielle. In the niche above the entrance, where wild roses grew, she saw a golden light. The light intensified, and within the light a figure appeared. A beautiful lady, dressed in white, with a blue sash and a white veil. The lady's feet were bare, but on each foot rested a golden rose. She held a rosary of white beads with a golden chain. The rosary hung over her arm. The lady looked at Bernadette with eyes full of kindness. She smiled gently, but said nothing. The apparition was silent, peaceful, radiant. Bernadette was not afraid. Later she would say, the lady looked at her the way one person looks at another person. There was nothing terrifying or strange, just peace. Bernadette reached for her own rosary. She tried to make the sign of the cross, but her hand was trembling so much she could not do it. The lady made the sign of the cross. Then Bernadette was able to cross herself, and she began to pray the rosary. As Bernadette prayed, the lady passed the beads of her own rosary through her fingers, but her lips did not move. She did not say the prayers aloud. Only at the end of each decade did the lady join Bernadette in saying the Glory Be. When the rosary was finished, the lady smiled at Bernadette once more. Then she slowly faded from view. The golden light disappeared. The niche in the rock was empty again. Her sister and friend returned with armfuls of wood. They found Bernadette sitting motionless, staring at the grotto. "What's wrong with you?" Toinette asked. "Why are you just sitting there?" Bernadette hesitated. Should she tell them? Would they believe her? Would they think she was crazy? But the experience was too powerful, too real to keep silent. "I saw a lady," Bernadette said softly, "in the grotto, dressed in white. She was beautiful." The girls looked at the grotto. They saw nothing, no light, no lady, just rocks and bushes. "You're imagining things," Jeanne said dismissively. "There's nothing there." But Bernadette insisted. She had seen something, someone, she was certain. The girls gathered their firewood and walked home together. Bernadette remained quiet, thinking about what she had witnessed. The lady's face, her smile, the golden light. When they reached home, Bernadette told her sister, "Please don't tell Mother what I saw. She won't believe it. She'll be angry." But children cannot keep secrets, and soon Toinette told their mother everything. Louise Soubirous was not pleased. "You saw what?" she demanded. "A lady in white, at Massabielle? That's nonsense. It was probably a soul from purgatory, or your imagination. Don't go back there. Do you understand? Don't go back." But Bernadette could not forget. The image of the lady was burned into her memory. The feeling of peace, the sense of being loved. She wanted to return to the grotto, to see if the lady would appear again. But her mother had forbidden it, and Bernadette was an obedient child. For now, she would wait. But not for long, because something was pulling her back to Massabielle. A call. She could not explain, but could not resist. And what would happen on her next visit would shock everyone, including Bernadette herself. 3 days passed. Bernadette thought of nothing but the lady in the grotto. She prayed. She wondered. She longed to return. Finally, she gathered her courage and asked her mother for permission to go back to Massabielle. Louise Soubirous was reluctant, but Bernadette pleaded. Other girls from the neighborhood also wanted to go, curious about Bernadette's story. Finally, her mother agreed, on one condition. "Take this," Louise said, handing Bernadette a small bottle. "It's holy water from the church. If you see this lady again, throw the water at her and say, 'If you come from God, stay. If you come from the devil, go away.' Do you understand?" Bernadette nodded. She took the bottle, and on Sunday, February 14th, after attending Mass, she walked to Massabielle. This time she was not alone. Several girls accompanied her, and 2 adult women. One of the women could read and write. She brought paper and a pen, planning to ask the lady to write her name if she appeared. The group arrived at the grotto. They knelt, took out their rosaries, and began to pray. Bernadette fixed her eyes on the niche above the entrance, where the wild roses grew, the same place where she had seen the golden light. She prayed 1 Hail Mary, 2, 3, and then it happened again. The light appeared, golden, radiant, growing brighter, and within the light the lady, dressed in white, smiling. Bernadette's face transformed. Those watching her saw the change. Her expression became radiant, peaceful, completely absorbed in what she was seeing. The other girls and women looked at the grotto. They saw nothing. No light, no lady, just rocks. But they could see that Bernadette was seeing something. Her ecstasy was undeniable, real, profound. Bernadette remembered her mother's instruction. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the bottle of holy water. With a trembling hand, she threw the water toward the niche and spoke the words in the Bigourdon dialect. "If you come from God, please stay. If not, go away." The lady's smile grew even wider. She seemed amused by the child's obedience. She inclined her head slightly, as if to say, "I am from God. Do not fear." The vision remained. The lady did not disappear. Bernadette felt relief, joy. She began to pray the rosary. The lady passed the beads of her own rosary through her fingers in perfect rhythm with Bernadette's prayers. One of the women, Madame Millet, tried to communicate with the apparition. She called to Bernadette, "Ask the lady to write her name on this paper." Bernadette relayed the request, looking up at the lady, waiting. The lady smiled and shook her head gently. "No," she seemed to say, though her lips did not form words. "That will not be necessary." The group prayed the entire rosary, 5 decades. Bernadette's eyes never left the lady. When the prayers ended, the lady smiled one last time, then faded away. The light disappeared. Bernadette returned to normal awareness. She looked around at the faces of those who had accompanied her. They were staring at her in wonder. "You saw her again, didn't you?" one of the women asked. Bernadette nodded. "Yes, the same lady in white." The women were convinced this was no imagination, no trick. Something real was happening to this simple girl at this forgotten grotto. Word spread quickly through Lourdes. People talked in the market, at church, at home. Some believed that Bernadette had seen the Virgin Mary. Others were skeptical, thinking it was hysteria, delusion, or a hoax. The parish priest, Abbé Dominique Peramal, heard the reports. He was a large man, imposing, with a booming voice, and little patience for nonsense. He did not believe in apparitions that happened to uneducated peasant girls in muddy grottos. If the Virgin Mary wanted to appear, she would come to the cathedral, to learned priests, not to a sickly child who couldn't even read. Abbé Peramal was skeptical, suspicious, even hostile. He would need proof, solid, undeniable proof, before he would accept that heaven had visited Lourdes. But for Bernadette there was no doubt. She had seen the lady twice now, and deep in her heart she knew she would see her again. What she didn't know yet was what the lady wanted, why she was appearing, what message she carried. Those answers would come but slowly, over the course of 16 more apparitions, each one revealing a little more of heaven's plan. And the next apparition would bring the first spoken words from the lady's lips. 4 days later, on Thursday, February 18th, Bernadette woke, with a strong interior pull to return to the grotto. It felt like a summons, a call that she could not ignore. This time, a larger group wanted to accompany her, perhaps 20 people, men and women, adults and children, all curious to witness whatever was happening. Among the group were 2 women of some social standing, Madame Millet and her friend. They brought ink and paper, determined to get the lady's name in writing. The group walked together to Massabielle in the early morning. The air was cold, the sky overcast, but spirits were high, anticipation was building. When they arrived, Bernadette knelt at her usual spot directly in front of the grotto entrance. The others knelt behind her, watching, waiting. Bernadette took out her rosary and began to pray, her eyes fixed on the niche above the entrance. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Some whispered to each other, "Do you see anything?" "No, nothing." Then Bernadette's face changed. The same radiant expression, the same peaceful absorption. She was seeing the lady again. The lady appeared in the golden light, smiling as before, but this time something was different. This time the lady spoke. Her voice was gentle, musical, like nothing Bernadette had ever heard. She spoke in Bigourdon, the local dialect, the language of Bernadette's heart. The lady said, "Would you do me the kindness of coming here for 15 days? Bernadette was startled. The lady was asking for something from her, a poor girl, a nobody. What could she possibly offer to this beautiful being? "Yes," Bernadette whispered, "I will come." The lady continued, "I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but in the next." These words would echo through Bernadette's life. She would suffer much in the years to come, illness, misunderstanding, exploitation. But she would cling to this promise. Happiness in heaven was worth any earthly suffering. The lady smiled, and the apparition ended. She faded away, leaving Bernadette kneeling in the cold, but filled with warmth. Madame Millet rushed forward. "What did she say? Did you ask her name? Did she write anything?" Bernadette shook her head. "She didn't write anything, but she spoke to me. She asked me to come here every day for 15 days. The crowd murmured. 15 days, 15 apparitions. What would happen in that time? What would be revealed? Bernadette stood, preparing to go home, but she knew she would return tomorrow and the day after, and every day for the next 2 weeks. What she didn't know was that these apparitions would attract thousands, that government officials would try to stop her, that she would face interrogation, mockery, even threats. But she also didn't know that a spring would appear, that miracles would happen, that the lady would finally reveal her name, and that revelation would shake France and change the world. But all of that was still to come. For now, Bernadette simply obeyed, returning each day to the grotto, to pray, to see the lady, to listen to whatever heaven wanted to say. The next morning, February 19th, Bernadette returned to the grotto, true to her promise, faithful to the lady's request. This time, an even larger crowd followed her. Word had spread throughout Lourdes and beyond. People were curious, skeptical, hopeful, afraid. When Bernadette knelt to pray, perhaps 50 people stood behind her, watching. Some prayed with her, others simply stared, waiting for something miraculous or scandalous to happen. The lady appeared, as she had promised, in the golden light above the grotto entrance. Only Bernadette could see her, but everyone could see the change in Bernadette's face. The apparition was brief. The lady smiled, but spoke no words. She simply looked at Bernadette with infinite tenderness, then faded away. Some in the crowd were disappointed. Nothing happened, they muttered. She just prayed, that's all. But for Bernadette, everything had happened. She had been in the presence of the lady. That was enough. February 20th, Saturday. Bernadette returned again. The crowd was larger still, perhaps 100 people gathering before dawn at the grotto. The lady appeared again, silent, smiling. Bernadette prayed the rosary, lost in ecstasy, unaware of the growing crowd, unaware of the whispers and speculations surrounding her. The local police commissioner, Jacomet, was present that day. He watched Bernadette carefully, looking for signs of deception, of fraud. He saw nothing suspicious, but he remained unconvinced. After the apparition ended, Jacomet approached Bernadette. "Come with me," he said, "to my office. I have questions for you." Bernadette, only 14 years old, accompanied him to the police station. There he interrogated her for hours. Who is this lady? What does she want? What does she look like? Are you making this up? Are you being paid? Who put you up to this? Question after question, Jacomet tried to trap her, to catch her in a lie, to break her story. But Bernadette's answers were simple, consistent, unwavering. "I don't know who she is. She is beautiful, dressed in white. She asked me to come for 15 days. That's all I know." Jacomet grew frustrated. This girl was either the most skilled liar he had ever met, or she was telling the absolute truth. He couldn't decide which. Finally, he let her go, but he warned her, "Don't go back to that grotto, do you hear me? This is causing a public disturbance. If you continue, there will be consequences." Bernadette said nothing. She simply went home. But in her heart she knew she would return. The lady had asked for 15 days, and Bernadette had promised. February 21st, Sunday. Bernadette went to Mass, as she always did, but afterward she did not go to the grotto. It was Sunday, a day of rest. The lady had not appeared on Sundays during the first week, but the crowd gathered anyway. Hundreds of people walked to Massabielle, hoping to see something, anything. They were disappointed. No apparition came. Without Bernadette, nothing happened. February 22nd, Monday. Bernadette returned to the grotto. The crowd was massive now, over 300 people, from Lourdes and surrounding villages. The authorities were alarmed. This was becoming a movement, a phenomenon, they couldn't control. The police increased their presence, watching, documenting everyone who attended. But they couldn't stop the lady from appearing, and she did aware to Bernadette. Silent again, smiling, present. Bernadette prayed, unaware of the political storm brewing around her, unaware that government officials were debating whether to arrest her, to stop the apparitions by force. All she knew was the lady, the golden light, the peace that filled her heart. When peace in that presence. February 23rd, Tuesday. The crowd swelled to over 400. People came from miles away, walking through the cold to witness the girl who saw visions. The lady appeared, and this time she taught Bernadette something. She showed her a specific prayer, a gesture. Bernadette would repeat this gesture during future apparitions. The lady took her rosary and showed Bernadette how to kiss the crucifix at the end of each decade, a sign of devotion, of love for Christ, who suffered for our sins. Bernadette imitated the lady's gesture, kissing her own rosary with reverence, with love. The crowd watched this simple act, and many were moved to tears. There was something about Bernadette's sincerity, her innocence, her complete absorption that touched hearts, even hearts that wanted to remain skeptical. February 24th, Wednesday. Bernadette returned. The lady appeared. Again brief, again silent, again smiling. But something was building, a sense of anticipation, as if the lady was preparing to reveal something important that would change everything. The crowd could feel it, the tension, the expectation. When will she speak again? What will? Will she tell us her name? Will she perform a miracle? Questions buzzed through the gathering like bees in a hive. Everyone wanted answers, but only Bernadette saw the lady, and the lady was taking her time, building toward a moment that no one could predict. And that moment was covering soon. Very quest, not yet, not yet. The lady had a plan, and she would reveal it in her own time, in her own way. February 25th, Thursday. The 9th apparition. This would be the day. Everything changed. Bernadette arrived at the grotto before dawn. The crowd was already there, hundreds upon hundreds, filling the riverbank, climbing the hillside for a better view. Bernadette knelt in her usual spot and began to pray. The rosary, her eyes fixed on the niche, waiting for the light. And it came, the golden radiance. The lady appeared, smiling as always, but today there was something different in her expression, a sense of purpose, of mission. The lady looked at Bernadette and spoke. "Go," she said gently, "and drink from the spring and wash in it." Bernadette was confused. A spring? Where? There is no spring here, only the river. But the lady repeated her instruction. Go to the spring, drink from it, and wash. Bernadette looked around, still kneeling. Where was this spring? She saw only the muddy ground, the rocks, the river flowing nearby. Then the lady made a gesture. She pointed toward the back of the grotto, to the ground inside the cave itself. Bernadette stood and walked toward the spot. The lady had indicated. The crowd watched, puzzled. What was she doing, walking into the grotto away from the niche? Bernadette reached the spot, at the back of the cave. The ground was muddy, wet, but there was no spring, no water flowing. She knelt down and began to dig with her hands, scooping mud and stones. The crowd murmured, "What is she doing? Has she gone mad?" Bernadette dug deeper, her hands covered in mud. Then water began to seep into the hole. Muddy water, barely a trickle. The lady had said, "Drink from it." So Bernadette bent down and tried to drink. The water was filthy, more mud than water. She got mud on her face, in her mouth. The crowd gasped, some laughed. "Look at her, she's eating mud, she's lost her mind." Bernadette tried 3 times to drink, each time getting more mud on her face. She looked dirty, foolish, humiliated. But she was obeying the lady's command. No matter how strange, no matter how embarrassing, she would do what was asked. Finally, she stopped trying to drink. The water was too muddy, too thick. She stood up, her face streaked with mud, and walked back to her kneeling spot. The apparition was over. The lady had faded. Bernadette made the sign of the cross and turned to face the crowd. The reaction was immediate and harsh. "She's crazy. She's making fools of us all. There's nothing there, just mud." People turned away, disgusted, disappointed. Many who had beloved now doubted. If this is from God, why whether he make her eat mud like an animal? Bernadette's godmother grabbed her arm. "Come away from here. You're humiliating yourself and your family. Enough of this nonsense." But Bernadette was not disturbed. She had done what the lady asked. That was all that mattered. She went home, washed her face, and said nothing to defend herself. She sympathized to see what would happen next. And what happened next would silence the critics and amaze the world. By that afternoon, the muddy trickle that Bernadette had uncovered began to flow more strongly. Water, clear water, was emerging from the spot she had dug. By the next morning, February 26th, the water was flowing steadily. A small spring had appeared, where whose had been no spring before. People came to see. They tasted the water. It was clean, pure, sweet. They filled bottles and took it home. Within days, the flow increased to gallons per minute. Within weeks, to thousands of gallons per day. The Skings had advert exactly where Bernadette told her. Those who had mocked began to wonder. Could testing real? Could this truly be the Virgin Mary appearing in Lourdes? But even more amazing than the spring's appearance were the reports that began to surface. A woman, nearly blind, washed her eyes with the water. Her sight was restored. A man with a paralyzed arm bathed it in the spring. Movement returned. A child dying of fever drank the water and recovered. Miracle after miracle was reported, some about be explained as coincidence or natural healing, but others defied all explanation. The consist at Lourdes had become a source of aiding, of hope, of wonder, and the lady had 4 to reveal, much more. But hobbled carefully, slowly, leading Bernadette and all who followed deeper into the visitors of Grand's love for suffering humanity. February 27th, Saturday, the 10th apparition. Bernadette returned to the grotto. The crowd was larger than ever, over 1,000 people. News of the spring had spread rapidly. The lady appeared, but again she spoke no words. She simply smiled and looked at Bernadette with love. Bernadette prayed. The crowd watched. The spring continued to flow. February 28th, Sunday. No apparition. Bernadette attended Mass and rested. The crowd went to Massabielle anyway, but without Bernadette, nothing happened. March 1st, Monday, the 11th apparition. The crowd numbered over 1,500. People from all over the region came to witness the phenomenon. The lady appeared, and this time she gave Bernadette a task. "Go," she said, "and tell the priests to build a chapel here and have people come in procession." A chapel at this muddy grotto, processions to this forgotten place. It seemed impossible, but the lady had spoken. After the apparition, Bernadette went directly to the parish church. She asked to see Abbé Peramal, the parish priest. The priest received her in his office. He was a large man, intimidating, known for his temper and his skepticism about these so-called apparitions. "Well," he demanded, "what do you want?" Bernadette, small and trembling, stood before him. "The lady," she began, "she asks that you build a chapel at the grotto and that people come in procession." Abbé Peramal stared at her, his face reddening. "The lady? What lady? You don't even know who this lady is, and you come here telling me to build a chapel?" He leaned forward, his voice rising. "If this lady wants a chapel, tell her to give me her name, and tell her to make the rosebush in the grotto bloom in winter. Then I'll believe." Bernadette stepped back, frightened by his anger, but she delivered her message. She had done what the lady asked. Now it was up to God. She left the priest's office and went home. Would the lady give her name? Would the rosebush bloom? Bernadette didn't know. She could only wait and pray. March 2nd, Tuesday, the 12th apparition. Over 2,000 people crowded around Massabielle. The authorities were now seriously concerned about public order. The lady appeared. Bernadette relayed the priest's request. "He wants to know your name, and he asks for the rosebush to bloom." The lady smiled, but said nothing. About her name and the rosebush remained bare. Winter was not yet over. The apparition ended. Bernadette was disappointed. Why wouldn't the lady reveal her name? Why not give a clear sign that everyone could see? But again, the lady had her reasons. Her timing was perfect, even if Bernadette couldn't understand it. Yet. March 3rd, Wednesday, the 13th apparition. The crowd swelled to over 3,000, the largest gathering yet. People came from 40 miles away, walking through the night to be present. The lady appeared, and she gave Bernadette another message. "Pray," she said, "for the conversion of sinners." This was her mission. Not just miracles, not just healings, but conversion. The transformation of hearts, the return of souls to God. "Penance," the lady said. "Penance, penance, penance. Pray for sinners." Bernadette began to weep, moved by the lady's words, by the urgency in her voice. The lady cared so deeply for lost souls, for those walking in darkness. The crowd watched as tears streamed down Bernadette's face. They couldn't hear the lady's words, but they could see the effect on the child. Something important was being communicated, something about sin, about repentance, about the state of the world and the need for prayer. Many in the crowd began to weep too, moved by an emotion they couldn't explain, a sense of their own sinfulness, their need for mercy, their desire to change. The lady's message was penetrating hearts, even without words being heard. The very presence of heaven at Massabielle was calling people back to God. The 15 days that the lady had requested were nearly over. Only 2 more apparitions in this first series, and still the lady had not revealed her name. Abbé Peramal remained skeptical. The rosebush had not bloomed. No undeniable miracle had forced belief. But thousands of people were coming to Lourdes. The spring flowed constantly. Healings were reported. Lives were being changed. Something was happening. Something real. Something that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained away. And the lady had one more surprise, one final revelation that would answer all questions about her identity. But that revelation would not come during the 15 days. It would come later, after a period of silence, after Bernadette had proven her faithfulness, her patience, her obedience. The lady would tell her name, but only when the time was exactly right. March 4th, Thursday, the 14th apparition, the final day of the 15 days. The lady had requested. The crowd was enormous. Estimates ranged from 8,000 to 20,000 people. The hillside was covered with people, as far as the eye could see. Civil authorities had declared the apparitions a public nuisance. Soldiers were present to maintain order. The police commissioner watched everything, documenting names of those who attended. Bernadette arrived early, before dawn. She made her way through the massive crowd to her usual spot. She knelt and began to pray. The lady appeared in the golden light, radiant, beautiful, smiling with such love. But she spoke no words. She simply looked at Bernadette. The silence was profound, holy, full of meaning, beyond words. Bernadette prayed the rosary, lost in contemplation of the lady's face. The crowd watched in absolute silence, thousands of people not making a sound. When the rosary ended, the lady smiled one final time. Then slowly, slowly, she faded away. The light diminished and disappeared. The 15th apparition was over. The 15 days were complete. Bernadette had fulfilled her promise. She had come every day, just as the lady had asked. But the lady had not revealed her name. The rose bush had not bloomed. Abbé Peramal's conditions had not been met. Bernadette stood and turned to face the massive crowd. They looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to say something, to explain what had happened. But Bernadette had nothing to say. She had seen the lady, that was all. The lady had given no new message, no dramatic sign, just her presence, her smile, her love. Some in the crowd were disappointed. That's it? Nothing happened? She didn't even speak? But others felt that something profound had occurred. The very silence seemed sacred. The absence of words somehow spoke more loudly than any message. Bernadette went home. She thought the apparitions were over. The lady had asked for 15 days, and she had come for 15 days. Now it was finished. Days passed, then weeks. Bernadette returned to her normal life, preparing for First Communion, helping her family, working when she could. But she often thought about the lady, about the golden light, about the words she had spoken. I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but in the next. Bernadette pondered what it all meant, why the lady had come to her of all people, what God's purpose was in these apparitions. The grotto at Massabielle remained a place of pilgrimage, even without apparitions. People continued to come to pray, to drink from the spring, to seek healing. The civil authorities tried to stop the pilgrimages. They erected barriers around the grotto. They posted guards. They threatened to arrest anyone who went there. But the people kept coming, climbing over barriers, sneaking past guards. In the middle of the night, they couldn't stay away. Something drew them to that place, to that water, to that holy ground. Abbé Peramal remained cautious, but even he couldn't deny that something extraordinary was happening. The spring alone was remarkable, appearing exactly where a poor girl said the Virgin Mary told her to dig. But he still wanted the lady's name. He still wanted a clear sign that this was truly from heaven, and he would get what he asked for. But not yet. Not yet. March passed into April. 3 weeks went by. Bernadette thought she would never see the lady again. But on March 25th, the feast of the Annunciation, the day the Church celebrates the angel Gabriel announcing to Mary that she would bear the Son of God, on that day, Bernadette felt the interior call once more. Go to the grotto. The lady was calling her back to Massabielle. Bernadette woke early, very early, around 5 in the morning. She walked to the grotto in the pre-dawn darkness, alone. No crowd. This time she knelt in her usual place and began to pray, the rosary, hoping, longing to see the lady one more time. And the lady came, in the golden light, more beautiful than ever, smiling, radiant, glorious. Bernadette's heart filled with joy, with peace, with love. The lady had returned. Heaven had not forgotten her. Bernadette gathered her courage and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Madame, she said, would you kindly tell me who you are? The lady smiled, but said nothing. She simply looked at Bernadette with infinite tenderness. Bernadette asked again, please, tell me your name. Again silence. The lady smiled, but did not answer. A third time Bernadette asked, please, madame, would you be so kind as to tell me who you are? And then the lady spoke. She opened her hands and raised her eyes to heaven. She joined her hands at her breast in a gesture of prayer, and she said in the Brie-Dordain dialect, Que soy era Immaculada Conceptio. I am the Immaculate Conception. Bernadette stared at the lady, not fully understanding the words she had heard. I am the Immaculate Conception. What did that mean? Bernadette had never heard this phrase before. She didn't know what Immaculate Conception meant. But she knew it was important. The lady had finally given her name, or at least revealed her identity. This was the answer everyone had been waiting for. Bernadette was afraid she would forget the words. They were unfamiliar, in a language slightly different from her usual dialect. She repeated them over and over as she ran from the grotto back to town. Que soy era Immaculada Concepción. Que soy era Immaculada Concepción. She whispered the words again and again, not wanting to forget a single syllable. She went straight to the parish church to find Abbé Peramal. It was early, but she had to tell him immediately. She found the priest and breathlessly repeated the lady's words. She told me her name. She said, Que soy era Immaculada Concepción. Abbé Peramal froze. His face went pale. He stared at Bernadette in shock. What did you say? Repeat those words exactly. Bernadette repeated them. Que soy era Immaculada Concepción. I am the Immaculate Conception. The priest sat down heavily. His skepticism, his resistance, his demands for proof, all crumbled in that moment. This uneducated girl, who couldn't read or write, who had never studied theology, who barely knew her catechism, had just quoted a complex doctrine that had only been officially defined 4 years earlier. In 1854, Pope Pius IX had solemnly declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, the teaching that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was conceived without original sin, that from the first moment of her existence she was pure, holy, immaculate. This was a theological concept discussed by scholars, debated by theologians, unknown to simple peasants, especially unknown to a 14-year-old girl who had never attended school. There was no way Bernadette could have known this term, no way she could have made it up or learned it from anyone in Lourdes. And yet, the lady had said, I am the Immaculate Conception, not I am Mary, not I am the Mother of God, but I am the Immaculate Conception, identifying herself with the very mystery of her sinless conception, the privilege that set her apart from all other human beings. Abbé Peramal looked at Bernadette with tears in his eyes. My child, he said softly, do you know what those words mean? Bernadette shook her head. No, Father, I don't understand them. I only know that's what the lady said. The priest nodded. Go home and tell no one else about this. Not yet. I need to think and pray about what this means. Bernadette left, obedient as always. She went home and waited for whatever would happen next. Abbé Peramal sat alone in his study, the weight of realization settling on him. The Virgin Mary had appeared in Lourdes, in his parish, to a poor girl at a forgotten grotto. Everything Bernadette had said was true. The apparitions were real. The lady was the Mother of God. Heaven had visited this small town in the Pyrenees. The priest knelt and prayed, asking forgiveness for his skepticism, for his harshness toward Bernadette, and asking guidance for what to do next. The news spread quickly through Lourdes. The lady gave her name. She said she is the Immaculate Conception. The Virgin Mary has appeared in our town. Some rejoiced, some remained skeptical, but most were awed by the declaration. Even those who doubted had to admit there was something inexplicable about Bernadette knowing this theological term. The spring at Massabielle continued to flow, thousands of gallons every day, crystal clear, pure, healing. More miracles were reported. A blind man received his sight. A woman with tumors was cured. A child near death recovered completely. The civil authorities intensified their efforts to close the grotto. They arrested people for trespassing. They threatened fines. They posted more guards. But nothing could stop the tide of pilgrims. They came by hundreds, by thousands, drawn by faith, by hope, by desperate need, for healing, for peace, for a touch from heaven. And Bernadette, the simple messenger, the humble visionary, found our life completely transformed. She had wanted only to make her first communion, to live quietly with her family, but Coach had other plans. She would become famous throughout France, throughout the world. Her name would be known for centuries to come. But closing promised, "I do not promises to make you happy in this closing." Fame would not bring Bernadette happiness. It would bring scrutiny, suspicion, exploitation, suffering. But chess in the next world, and fond about dead, that was enough. After the lady revealed her identity, as the Immaculate Conception, the apparitions continued, but less frequently. On April 7th, Bernadette felt called to return to the grotto. It was the 17th apparition. Over 3,000 people were present. During this apparition, something remarkable happened. Bernadette was praying the rosary, lost in ecstasy, when suddenly her hand moved toward a lit candle that she was holding. Her hand hovered over the flame. The flame touched her skin for several minutes. Witnesses watched in amazement, expecting her to be burned. But when the ecstasy ended, Bernadette's hand was completely unharmed. Not a mark, not a burn, not even redness on her skin. Dr. Dozus, the town physician, was present. He had been skeptical of the apparitions, but he examined Bernadette's hand immediately after and found no injury of any kind. He was astounded. "It's impossible," he said. "No one can hold their hand in a flame for that long without serious burns. This defies medical explanation." This miracle convinced many who had doubted, including Dr. Dozus himself, who became a believer and a defender of the apparitions. The final apparition occurred on July 16th, the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Bernadette felt the familiar call to go to the grotto, but there was a problem. The authorities had erected a tall fence around Massabielle. Guards were posted. No one was allowed to approach the grotto. Bernadette could not get close to her usual spot, so she stood on the opposite side of the Gave de Pau river, looking across the water toward the grotto. And there, for the final time, the lady appeared, more beautiful than ever. The golden light shone brightly, even though Bernadette was far away. The lady smiled at Bernadette. Across the distance, she spoke no words. She simply looked at her with infinite love for the last time. Then she faded away. The light disappeared. The 18th apparition was over. The series of apparitions was complete. Bernadette never saw the lady again. Never again in this life would she experience that golden light, that beautiful presence, that overwhelming love. But the memory sustained her through all the trials that followed, through interrogations, through illness, through the remainder of her short life. The lady had promised, "I do not promise to make you happy in this world, but in the next." And Bernadette clung to that promise through everything. After the apparitions ended, Bernadette's life became increasingly difficult. She was constantly questioned by church officials, by government investigators, by journalists, by the curious. Everyone wanted to see her, to question her, to test her, to see if she was genuine or a fraud. The attention was overwhelming for a shy girl who wanted only peace and privacy. But there was no escape from the fame. The apparitions had brought, in 1860, 2 years after the apparitions, the Bishop of Tarbes, after careful investigation, officially declared, "We judge that Mary, Immaculate Mother of God, really did appear to Bernadette Soubirous on February 11th, 1858, and on subsequent days 18 times in all." The Church had spoken. The apparitions were authentic. The grotto was declared a place of pilgrimage, and a chapel was built, just as the lady had requested. Bernadette finally made her first Holy Communion, the desire that had brought her back to Lourdes. In January 1858 was fulfilled at last. But her health continued to decline. The asthma that had plagued her since childhood grew worse. She was often ill, often in pain. In 1866, at age 22, Bernadette entered the convent of the Sisters of Charity in Nevers, far from Lourdes. She took the name Sister Marie Bernard. She hoped that in the convent she would find peace, away from the crowds, away from the questions, away from the fame. But even there she was not forgotten. Visitors came, wanting to see her, wanting to hear her story. The other nuns treated her differently, some with reverence, some with jealousy. The Mother Superior was particularly harsh with Bernadette, fearing that pride might corrupt her. She assigned Bernadette the most menial tasks, spoke to her sharply, publicly corrected her. Bernadette bore it all with patience, with humility. She never complained, never defended herself, never spoke of her special grace unless ordered to do so. When asked about the apparitions, Bernadette would say, "The Virgin used me, like a broom, to remove dust. When the work is done, the broom is put behind the door and forgotten." She understood her role. She was an instrument, nothing more. The Lady had used her for a purpose, and now that purpose was fulfilled. Bernadette's health continued to deteriorate. She suffered from tuberculosis of the bone in her right knee. The pain was excruciating, constant, unrelenting. She also developed tumors in her body. She had difficulty breathing due to her chronic asthma and the tuberculosis spreading to her lungs. For the last years of her life, Bernadette was confined to the convent infirmary, unable to walk, in constant pain, dependent on others for the most basic needs. But through it all, she maintained her faith, her peace, her certainty that she would be happy in the next world. On her deathbed, Bernadette was heard to whisper, "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for me, a poor sinner." On April 16th, 1879, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Bernadette died. She was 35 years old. She had lived less than half a normal lifespan. Her life marked by poverty, illness, and suffering. But she had been faithful to the Lady's call, to the mission given to her. And she died in peace, trusting in the promise of happiness in heaven. Bernadette's body was placed in a coffin and buried in the convent chapel. But her story was far from over. In 1909, 30 years after her death, her body was exhumed. As part of the canonization process, the Church wanted to examine her remains. When the coffin was opened, witnesses were shocked. Bernadette's body was incorrupt, perfectly preserved, as if she had died just days before, not decades. Her face was peaceful, her hands still soft. There was no smell of decay, no sign of decomposition. This was considered a miracle, a sign of her holiness. The body was exhumed 2 more times, in 1919 and 1925. Each time it remained incorrupt. Eventually it was placed in a glass reliquary in the convent chapel, where it remains to this day. On December 8, 1933, Pope Pius XI canonized Bernadette. She became Saint Bernadette Soubirous. Her feast day is celebrated on April 16th, the anniversary of her death. But while Bernadette's earthly life was short and painful, the impact of the apparitions continues to this day. The grotto at Massabielle has become one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the entire world. Over 6 million people come to Lourdes every year. They come seeking healing, seeking peace, seeking hope, seeking a touch from heaven, just as people did in Bernadette's time. The spring that Bernadette uncovered still flows, producing about 27,000 gallons of water per day. The water is collected in special pools called the baths, where pilgrims can immerse themselves. Thousands of miracles have been reported at Lourdes. The medical bureau, established to investigate claims, has carefully documented numerous healings that defy medical explanation. As of today, the Catholic Church has officially recognized 70 miraculous cures at Lourdes. Cases where people with terminal illnesses, incurable diseases, or severe disabilities were suddenly and completely healed after bathing in the water or praying at the grotto. But the real number of healings is far higher. Many people experience physical improvement, emotional healing, spiritual renewal that they attribute to their pilgrimage to Lourdes. The Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary was built above the grotto, just as the Lady had requested, along with several other churches and chapels. The area is now a vast sanctuary dedicated to prayer. Every night, a candlelight procession winds through the sanctuary. Thousands of pilgrims carrying candles, singing hymns to Our Lady in dozens of languages. The Rosary is prayed constantly at Lourdes, just as the Lady prayed it with Bernadette. The message of prayer, of penance, of conversion continues to echo through the grotto. Lourdes has become a place of hope for the suffering. The sick come on stretchers, in wheelchairs, carried by family members, hoping for a cure. But even those who are not cured often find peace, acceptance, and the strength to carry their cross. The apparitions at Lourdes changed the world's understanding of Mary's role in salvation history. She is not merely a figure from the past, but a living presence, interceding for humanity, caring for her children, appearing when needed to call us back to her Son. The message Bernadette received is as relevant today as it was in 1858. Pray for the conversion of sinners. Penance, penance, penance. The world still needs conversion, still needs prayer, still needs to turn away from sin and turn toward God. And Lourdes stands as a testament to God's mercy, to Mary's maternal love, to the power of faith, and to the truth that heaven cares about our suffering, our struggles, our need for healing. Bernadette was right to trust the Lady's promise. She was not made happy in this world. Her life was marked by poverty, pain, and persecution. But she is happy now in heaven, a saint forever united with the Lady who appeared to her in the grotto. And millions of pilgrims continue to come to that same grotto to pray, to hope, to seek the face of Our Lady of Lourdes, the Immaculate Conception who chose a poor girl to bring a message of hope and healing to a broken world. The story of Lourdes is not just history. It is ongoing every day. New pilgrims arrive, new prayers are offered, new graces are received. The spring still flows, the candles still burn, the rosary is still prayed, and the Lady's message still echoes through the grotto. Pray for sinners. Do penance. Come to the spring. Come to me. Come to my Son. This of the story of Our Lady of Lourdes, a story of faith, of obedience, of suffering, and of hope. May it bring you peace as you rest, and may you, like Bernadette, trust in the promise of happiness in the life to come.